Welcome, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining this very important webinar at this very important moment. Uh, Most importantly, I'm really thankful to our panelists. I will briefly introduce our panelists, and soon after that, we will have our first session of interventions by our panelists. Each panelist will speak for 10 minutes, and after that, we will have 10 minutes for Q&A session. The panelists will have another round of summing up and answering the questions. And then in the fourth phase, we will allow if the people in the audience are, interested in saying something on mic. During the Q&A session, you can send your questions in writing in the chat room. We are very fortunate to have three very important speakers today. Let me introduce, first of all, Farzana Bari. She is a leader of the Awami Workers Party in Pakistan. She was, the founding person of she founded the first chair for gender studies in Pakistan, a very known feminist activist, theoretician, and very active in a lot of struggles, quite well-known name in Pakistani progressive circles and even oftentimes on mainstream media. We have from Afghanistan, Sahar Saba. Now she lives in Europe and works as a teacher. She was spokesperson for Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, RAWA, as it is usually known by its abbreviation. She has studied law and media from Swiss University of London. She has also a degree in early school years education from Luleå University of Sweden. She has been active in refugee camps that were stationed in Peshawar in organizing underground schools for girls. Also, after 9/11, she was spokesperson and traveled to many countries from Japan to USA and many other countries representing Afghanistan and Rava. Finally, we have Frieda Afary. She is based in Los Angeles. She has studied philosophy and library sciences. She is a public librarian, but most importantly, a feminist and activist. She has written a book published by Pluto 2 years ago. It is titled Socialist Feminism, A New Perspective. She also runs two blogs. One is titled Iranian Progressives in Translation. The other is titled socialistfeminism.org. Please do visit these blogs. You will find a lot of interesting stuff. And she also writes herself about Iran, one of the finest analysts we have from Iran. Welcome you all. And in the first session, we begin with Frieda. Next, Sahar will speak. And finally, Farzana Bari will speak for 10 minutes. I hope everybody sticks by this 10-minute limit, else I will intervene. And you all will get another chance, and then this order will be reversed. Without wasting any time, over to you, Frieda.
Thank you so much, Farouk, and thanks to Sahar and Farzana, Thomas Rieger, and the whole audience. I've written out my comments to make sure that I don't go over my 10-minute limit, so apologize for reading written out comments. Okay, so September 2024 marks the second anniversary of the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran. In September of 2022, large nationwide protests against the state police murder of a young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Jina Amini, marked an unprecedented development in Iranian society. Women and girls from middle class and working class families were in the forefront of these protests, which lasted for several months and involved women burning their compulsory hijabs, chanting the slogan "Women Like Freedom" and issuing feminist statements. The Iranian government succeeded in cracking down on the movement by arresting over 20,000, killing over 500, executing 7, blinding and raping many protesters over the course of several months. It also poisons thousands of schoolgirls. Despite this repression, the spirit of resistance, especially among young women, continues and is waiting for another opportunity to express itself. Here, I would like to single out some of the unique feminist features and demands of the Women Life Freedom movement that made it a beacon of hope for the region and the world. First, the most significant feminist challenge, I believe, came from a group of Baluch women named Dastgoharan, or Sisterhood, who issued a number of collective statements articulating the demands of Baluch women. This was especially meaningful because the Baluch population in the province of Sistan and Baluchistan in southeastern Iran are the most marginalized and most deprived sectors of the Iranian population. And Baluch women are truly the most oppressed. The first Dastgoharan statement in October of 2022 confronted an army colonel's rape of a 15-year-old girl during interrogation. It spoke out against the state-organized mass shooting of over 100 Baluchis after a protest against this rape. The Dastgoharan group also challenged the chief Sunni cleric of the Baluchis, Maulavi Abdul Hamid. They exposed his history of collaboration with the Iranian regime and the Taliban, as well as his sexist practices, including allowing families to deny an education to girls. Very little of this criticism was ever mentioned in mainstream diasporic Iranian media when they covered Maulavi Abdul Hamid. Dastgoharan also stated that they were against all, as is the quote, against all forms of domination and repression, and wanted to express Baluch women's own independent voice. They refused to separate patriarchy from its social, economic, and historical context or limit it to a cultural phenomenon. They saw the new uprising in Iran as an opportunity to raise all these demands, including the rights of the lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. Now, in addition to that very unique feature, I wanted to single out the various Iranian women's rights groups or individuals inside and outside Iran who published statements to articulate specific feminist demands. These statements called for free and equal quality education for women and men at all levels without any gender segregation, women's equal participation in the social, political, and economic sphere, reproductive and abortion rights, divorce and child custody rights, banning female genital mutilation, child marriage and polygamy, criminalizing gender violence and sexual harassment, categorizing domestic work as onerous and paid labor, legal and health services for women prisoners. All of these demands were raised, which are quite remarkable for Iranian society. Some feminists argued that demands could not be left at the minimum civil society level, but needed to include human rights, including oppressed national, religious, and sexual minorities, as well as migrants, such as Afghans. We have a large, as you know, we have a large population of Afghan migrants who have lived, over 1 million, and they've been arriving in the past 20, 30 years. So it's a huge community. They advocated social justice and positive discrimination, or affirmative action, as we call it in the US. And others opposed any call for the legalization of sex work, but advocated decriminalizing sex workers. They also opposed exploitation, and specifically the exploitation of working women, while also advocating the socialization of domestic labor. So the result of these efforts to bring together feminist and labor struggles was also seen in a remarkable statement published by all the important progressive labor organizations inside Iran, and it was entitled The Statement of Minimum Demands of Independent Iranian Unions and Civil Society Organizations. So that statement, and I won't go into the details of it, that statement included some of these very demands that I just pointed out, which are quite radical for Iranian society, and especially for labor organizations. It is necessary to emphasize also the importance of the contributions of Iran's imprisoned feminist activists and their efforts to articulate progressive perspectives both before and after the woman life freedom movement. Some of the most vocal and articulate voices for justice and human rights in Iran are those of experienced and active feminists languishing in prisons or out on furlough and under many restrictions. These have included Nargis Mohammadi, who's a 2023 Nobel Peace Laureate, writer, activist, and campaigner against the death penalty and solitary confinement, Nasrin Sotoudeh, a human rights attorney, and other writers and activists such as Atena Daemi, Golrukh Irai, Zainab Jalalian, Safida Qolian, and many others. These feminists have written about the terrible conditions faced by imprisoned women in general. Nasrin Sotoudeh voiced powerful feminist ideas in a documentary entitled Nasrin that was made by two progressive US filmmakers, Marsha Ross and Jeff Kaufman. And that's available online if you'd like to see it. Nargis Mohammadi has published White Torture, which is a 2-volume book about solitary confinement. And it's about how solitary confinement is a form of torture that does lasting, lifelong damage to the victims. Inside prisons, they and other imprisoned feminists have created new bonds of solidarity with marginalized women from oppressed ethnic and national minorities such as Kurds, Arabs, and the Baluch, and oppressed religious minorities such as the Baha'is, who I'm sure you know have absolutely no rights in Iran. The feminists have exposed the intertwining of incarceration, state violence, gender violence, economic inequality, patriarchy, and various forms of ethnic and religious discrimination. Currently, 2 imprisoned Iranian activists, women activists Sharifeh Mohammadi and Pakhshan Azizi, are facing the death penalty on charges of rebelling against the Islamic State, that is Iran's Islamic State. Varishe Moradi and Nasim Gholami are also expecting the death sentence. 2 of these women are Kurdish. Women and men prisoners continue to hold hunger strikes in opposition to the death penalty. And in the past 15 months, 15 women's rights and environmental rights activists have been sentenced to prison terms. Iran's imprisoned feminists are internationalists. So do I have 1 more minute? Do I have 1 more minute?
Please go on.
Okay, thank you so much. So Iran's imprisoned feminists are internationalists. In August of 2021, during a brief furlough from prison, Nargis Mohammadi organized a women's protest in front of the Afghan embassy to protest the return to power of the Taliban. In November of 2023, Mohammadi issued a statement from prison which condemned Hamas's October 7 assault on Israel and Israel's brutal war on Gaza. In March of 2022, Nasrin Sotoudeh issued an open letter of support for the Ukrainian struggle for self-determination and strongly condemned Russia's imperialist invasion of Ukraine. And most recently, Sotoudeh has opposed the direct shooting war between Iran and Israel and wrote, quote, "We do not want to respond to the illegal action of a government with the illegal action of launching missiles and drones." she has emphasized that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights should be a guiding light for all. So to sum up, Iranian feminists are very active, both in terms of protests and writing statements and doing internationalist work. And they're also very interested in how feminists in other countries have theorized gender oppression and what ideas they have offered on the intersection of gender, class, and race oppression. During the past 20 years, various feminist works from a variety of points of view have been translated into Persian and published either legally or illegally, or published on the internet and made available digitally. And various Iranian women have been involved in writing books and sociological analyses. And my own experience as an Iranian American feminist activist and translator over the past 4 decades led me to write the book Socialist Feminism: A New Approach, whose publication coincided with the Women Life Freedom movement. And I was very, very proud of that. So I'd be happy to say more about the book during the Q&A period. And I am really looking forward to hearing from Farzana Bari and Sahar Saba and the ways in which we can promote international feminist solidarity in the region and globally. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Frieda Afary. And now I will invite Sahar Saba. Over to you, Sahar, without any wastage of time.
Thank you so much for today's webinar, and it was really interesting and inspiring listening to you, Frieda. And I must say that we in Afghanistan have always been inspired by the struggle and resistance of Iranian people, but mostly of the brave women in Iran. So hopefully we will be hearing more during this session. As for Afghanistan, I must say that it's hard for me really to find words to describe what happened all these years and what's happening now. In 1996, almost more than 30 years ago, we were talking about the Taliban suppression of women, the Taliban's rule, the Taliban restriction, not just on women, but the people. In 30 years on, unfortunately, we have to talk about this painful situation again. So the current situation, I'm sure that most of you have heard a lot what's happening in Afghanistan, but I will briefly summarize since 2021, August 2021, when the Taliban for the second time came back to power. So the situation is undoubtedly grim and tragic. And it not just affecting the women, but all the citizens. And I think it's very important. We all the time talk about, or we must talk about what happened to Afghan women, but I believe that it's the whole nation who is suffering. So if we talk about the suffering of Afghan women, so Afghanistan is perhaps the only country on the face of earth where women are not allowed to be heard, so let alone having access to education, to job opportunities, to healthcare, to entertainment, or to any other human activity. As I said, access to education, jobs, and health services are severely limited, not only for women, but for the whole population in Afghanistan. Women in particular have been intimidated, restricted, but even men who have raised their voice against the Taliban, they have been executed. Even there have been extrajudicial killing in Afghanistan. Security is really deteriorating. There are looting, there are stealing, there are fear of going out anywhere, traveling, and it's very obviously for women it's a lot more than men, but even men are very much restricted and fearful for their own lives in Afghanistan today. There is restrictions on freedom of expression. Media has become a propaganda tool for the Taliban. And whatever they want, the media has to report and talk about. There is huge humanitarian crisis. It's very severe and it's ongoing. The situation we can talk more and more about in details, but I think maybe it's not really needed in today's webinar. For I believe most of us who have participated know what is happening. But the other point, which is I think very important and for us to raise, is that who is or are responsible for bringing back Afghanistan to this point, to this situation. And I also believe that majority of Afghan people will agree with me by saying that it is not the people of Afghanistan themselves who are responsible for this situation, unlike many accusing the Afghan people for not raising their voice or for supporting the Taliban, which is not true and which is not fact. It is the so-called international community who 20 years ago started a project in the name of liberating Afghan women, but who imposed and installed the most criminal, misogynist, and corrupt warlords back in power. And that was one of the main reasons that opened way for the coming back of the Taliban again. It is the jihadi warlords who once again found a chance with the support of the so-called international community, the NATO countries, the 40 countries with thousands of troops in Afghanistan, who with clean shaves and ties continue to exploit and loot the Afghan people and building their own fortunes, both within and outside the country. Also with collaboration with the Taliban, in dealing with them in order to benefit themselves and enriching themselves and looting more. The Afghan state, the so-called Republic State of Afghanistan, with all the corruption that happened there, is responsible for this situation. And even I would say that so-called women representative who openly, with open arms, welcomed the occupation of Afghanistan in 2001 after the so-called collapse of the Taliban, and continued to cooperate with the invaders, but most importantly, through their deeds and participation in the process like in Doha and other, to give or build another image of the Taliban, to present the Taliban as change, as modern, as human to the Afghan people, while themselves escaped Afghanistan and built once again their own lives outside of the country. The international NGOs, national NGOs can be and should be taken accountable because they were also engaged with the corrupt officials and warlords. They enriched themselves with funds which were meant for the reconstruction of Afghanistan, and which we didn't see any visible impact of what they did in Afghanistan when it comes to the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the country. Then our neighboring countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, certainly are responsible for what happens today in Afghanistan in all these years since 1979 after the Soviet occupation. by actively and ruthlessly supporting fundamentalist groups, which further destabilized Afghanistan in many different ways. Now, what we want or what we can do in this situation, I think the most important thing is we have gathered today here to talk and give information what's happening and to document the crimes of the Taliban in Afghanistan. But it's also very important that by no means the Taliban should be recognized. We hear and we see a lot of efforts be done to open ways for the recognition of the Taliban, and that should not happen at any cost. The humanitarian support must continue because the Afghan people, women, children must not suffer and should not pay for the crimes and atrocities committed by the Taliban. It's also important because these, whether the Taliban or the jihadi criminals or the international occupiers, if they are not brought to justice, to court, the situation will continue, and we have witnessed this for more than 40 years now. So it's very important that we demand the trial of these criminals of all sorts, not just the Taliban, but the jihadis, the warlords, the international occupiers for committing crimes that are unprecedented in the history of the world. And lastly, I would emphasize that international solidarity is very important for the emancipation, for the bringing back the Afghan women's rights to raise and support the resistance of Afghan women. So especially in the region, in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, it's very important that we establish or we have the solidarity in order to really support each other in our struggle for the emancipation of Afghan women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And without much ado, over to Farzana Bari. Welcome, Farzana.
Thank you. Thank you, Farooq and Jidojahid for organizing this seminar. And thank you, Frieda and Sahar. I feel that, you know, when hearing the situation, I think there is so much commonality in terms of the way the women have suffered in this region. You know, I think we all suffered this kind of a capitalist patriarchy and the state repression, as well as this radical, so-called, radical Islam and Talibanization. And so I think in that way, we all have very kind of a shared sort of experiences. As for Pakistan, I think this, the state, and if you look at the state and the society, personally, I feel that if the Pakistani women are suffering, at both level, both, the patriarchal state as well the society, which is very much, where this whole patriarchal norms are so much embedded in our social and cultural frameworks, to the extent that in Pakistan, we have been struggling, for gender rights for the last, I think 76 years now. And unfortunately, I feel that still in Pakistan, Pakistani women are struggling to have a equals, demanding like kind of equality of status, and even legally, we have not been granted that status as per the Constitution of Pakistan. Although at one level, I think we have Article 25, which says there will not be any discrimination on the basis of sex. And yet we do see, there are so many legislation which discriminate against women legally women have kind of a second-class citizen. I think there's a number of laws, and obviously I don't have a time here to go through that, but even, you know, a law of evidence with 2 women's witnesses equal to 1 man, Citizenship Act, I'm sure perhaps, you know, Farooq, you will be a lot more aware. You're married to an Afghan woman, and I'm sure that she will be entitled, because in our law, if a Pakistani man is married to a non-Pakistani woman, that's her, you know, the woman, his wife will entitled to have a Pakistan citizenship. But if a Pakistani woman married to a non-Pakistani, I think the state punish Pakistani women, and she will not, her husband will not have a nationality, you know, Pakistani nationality. So the kind of, you know, at the even with the legal, you know, status, we are struggling to have equality of status, you know, equality of citizenship in the law. And I think as far as society is concerned, I think although there is the level of patriarchy, I think we women in Pakistan may have slightly different face, you know, because Pakistan is kind of a country which has a very uneven socioeconomic development. And Farida, as you said, like Baloch in Pakistan is also, Balochistan is a region which is the most underdeveloped, you know. And if you look at the gender kind of the indicators, I think the gender indicators are the worst in Balochistan. So overall, generally speaking, if you look at the status of Pakistani women, it's quite you know, dismal. Even the literacy, you know, the literacy rate amongst women is still much less than, you know, is hardly, we are 49% as compared to 72% of the literacy rate amongst men. Health status is the worst in the region, you know. We are still losing almost 186 women per 100 live, you know, live birth. Political status, again, we do have gender quotas, and as a result of that, we'll find like almost 20% women are in the parliament. But when it comes to, you know, giving women positions in the cabinet or in the parliamentary standing committees or in decision-making position, I think we do not see that women are making progress at that level. Similarly, if you look at the employment sector, in the formal sector of economy, we still have, you know, not more than 22% of women, although I feel that the women in Pakistan are working, you know, because the informal sector of economy in Pakistan is a much bigger sector of economy as compared to the formal sector of economy. And 70% of the labor in the informal sector is actually consist of women. So if you look at, you know, this kind of situation, gender-based violence is very much on the rise. All kind of, you know, generally there is a, you know, there is a rising trend of violence in Pakistan, you know, against children, against religious minorities, against sexual minorities. But I think especially for against women, and sexual violence has been rising, you know, tremendously, and there is a total failure of the state to effectively respond to actually the insecurity of women in Pakistan. So I think this is like. So when you look at this kind of generally, you know, speaking, it shows like a very pathetic sort of situation even after 76 years, and where women's movement have been pretty strong in Pakistan, you know, and they have been constantly, you know, fighting for gender rights and all that. But overall, I think the indicators are still not that great. We are still you know, featuring quite low when it comes to Global Gender Gap Index. Pakistan is, I think, in the latest one, we are the second last country. So in that way, but I think on the other hand, as you know, women in Pakistan are also not a unitary category. We are not a homogeneous kind of a group. So we could also see simultaneously why there is increasingly kind of a state repression. There is a you know, religious extremism where women have been attacked. Religion has been very much weaponized to actually threaten women, accuse them with blasphemy laws and things like that, especially the women activists, and yet I think the women are making a headway. As I said, although at one level there is a huge disparity in literacy rate, but when it comes to higher education, there is a parity. Women are actually participating, especially in the last decade. If you see, there's a lot of resistance movement in Pakistan. Actually, I was talking to Farooq and I said, you title it Axis of Hope. So if there is any axis of hope in Pakistan, it is just the resistance movements, And interestingly, the young women, especially the young feminists, are participating in these resistance movements. We are, if you look at before that, I would say, before the last previous decade, and there was a women's movement, but the older generation movements was actually fighting for the rights of women, engaging with the state, demanding for the legal rights, protection for all kind of violence, fundamental rights to access to education, health, and so on and so forth. So I think the older previous sort of a women's movement was more focusing on the public patriarchy and trying to demand, the women's right from the state. But for the last decade, what we see the change in women's movement, where the young feminists are now basically challenging private patriarchy. They are also questioning interpersonal relationships. They are demanding, more kind of a sharing of domestic work. Some of the, this young feminists who have formed this group called Aurat March. They are organizing International Women's Day, kind of a rallies all over Pakistan. Not all in the sense, mostly in a few kind of cities, but every year there is an increase in terms of more and more women. Various cities are organizing, women are organizing, and they're coming out. And the demands are almost, Farida, what you were saying, they're almost a similar kind of demand. The Aurat March is an open space for all kind of sexual minorities, religious minorities, the vulnerable groups, and similar kind of demands coming out of, Aurat March. But obviously, these demands are, addressing the state, and the Pakistani state is increasingly, I think, becoming totally disconnected with the people, and continue to serve the interest of not only the local elite, but also the international bourgeoisie. And what Sahar was saying, yes, we are also suffered the way Pakistani state has decided to become a frontline state, in the region to serve the interest of imperialist powers, and at the expense of the, foregoing people's citizens' rights and all that. And I think the way Afghanistan suffered because of this policy, and the Pakistan's role in Afghanistan during the Cold War, I think equally Pakistani also suffered from the same policies, and a lot of radicalization and Talibanization, and particularly, of course, they see women as a kind of a threat, because their Islam starts with women and ends with women, So to control women's life, women's sexualities, women's mobility, women in Pakistan have been suffering also because of that. But I think the good thing is now what I see, that women have been coming out, they have broken that kind of a silence, whether it is around, violence, or around, the state repression. If you see, women are becoming more active in the democratic movements in Pakistan. They are participating a lot more, and especially in the progressive secularist movements. I think the women are participating in a much bigger role and number, as well as also taking a lead in that. Particularly, I think some of the very strongest movement in Pakistan, especially in the region of Balochistan, Baloch Rajati movement, it's led by women rights activists, and very strong women like Maren Baloch and Sami Adin, Samidin Baloch and others, and even Haq Do movement in Gwadar is also, I think we never see, is unprecedented in the history of Pakistan, that the number of women who came out in the Haq Do movement because of the kind of the development which is happening in Gwadar under the CPAC, kind of initiatives, and the people in Balochistan feel that they're again being discriminated and all that. So that is the movement which is also led by women rights activists. And we also see several other, articulation of resistance movement where women are taking a lead, So I see that this is the major, I see the kind of silver lining, although I must say still we do not have the kind of critical mass out there. There are a lot more women who are leading this movement, but we don't see women in much larger number. So we are still have to work towards reaching out to women across rural urban divide, across class. So that is the one area. But I think when I look at the women's kind of the movement in Pakistan, what I see is there is a less kind of a connections with the progressive movements, like with the left movement, with the labor movement, and I think there is a need for us to make stronger linkages, there. Similarly, I think the women's movement in Pakistan have less linkages across region as well as across borders internationally, and that could also I think help us greatly. If we can have a stronger linkages, because a lot of, the kind of issues which we're facing, especially the nature of the state and the kind of repressive, policies of this, the state coming with the linkages with the imperialist powers and, and the kind of, economic policies which are which is being followed in the region, and that has creating a lot of economic issues in the region where women are suffering also a lot more. I think these cross-border linkages will help us to also strengthen our movements internally as well. So I think this is something, because there's a lot to talk about, but I would probably stop here, because I suppose if there are people having any question, or if the panelists have more questions, I will be happy to talk about that. So I rather stop here. Thank you.
In the case of Farzana Bari, I want to know more about Aurat March. You spoke about Aurat March,
Right.
Women March. There are some people who won't understand the word Aurat March. It generated a lot of energy like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was, another kind of movement, unlike, as you said, 1980s. And then religion was used against it. I pointed out the case of Asma Batul from Kashmir, but religion has really been deployed against women movement, every possible movement.
Yes.
So, beyond the Islamophobic kind of interpretations and situation in Europe and the international atmosphere, religion in itself, or the politicized religion, Islamic fundamentalism as we call it, has become a real challenge. Could you please briefly look at these dynamics, how it is being used against it? Also, how as women activists and socialist activists, you deal with it?
Sure. Sure, Farooq. Basically, Aurat March back in 2018, although International Women's Day has always been celebrated by women's organizations in Pakistan, but often it used to be like, various NGOs organizing, getting some funds to do that. Under the banner of Women Action Forum, we used to commemorate International Women's Day. But then 2018, I think it was like kind of mostly the young feminists, who got together, and they started doing this very systematic kind of mobilization for International Women's Day. And so after 2018, I think first time it was in Karachi. That was I think was organized. And I think some of the slogans, as I said, the difference between the Aurat March and the kind of, the space it created, which was very inclusive space, and they were not policing, everybody can come, and they could come with their own banner, with their own kind of slogan, or whatever the issue concerned them the most, they could come with that. So I think the media initially picked up some of those, sort of slogans, which was like, Mera jism meri marzi, my body, my choice, And so there was a lot of, kind of a debate. So it has created this kind of, kind of anxiety in a society that, why women are being now claiming, and also they're claiming their rights over their own bodies, over their own sexuality, because culturally it's a male kind of privilege. So I think a lot of then social media campaign was run by this this more conservative religious, groups, and they also started sending, kind of a threats to women rights activists. I think 2019, when we were kind of attacked. The Aurat March was attacked in Islamabad. There was a religious seminary. These people started pelting stones on the people who were participating in that, sort of commemoration, celebration. I think the very next year is what we have seen, because we still continue to do that, organize this Aurat March. So the next year, what they did, they doctored some of these slogans, and they accused some of the women in the, under blasphemy law. And, one in Pakistan, once anybody is accused of blasphemy, I think it's already kind of a death sentence for that people. So constantly what we see that, against Aurat March, not only the attacks and the threats comes from the very conservative religious groups, but what we see is the state also stand with them, that all Aurat March, all these years, with the exception of year one, 2018, we had NOC, but after that, we never given like, NOC, like, to organize. It was always refused, because every year now this religious groups, and especially they also mobilize the women of, especially in Islamabad, there is a Lal Masjid, there's a mosque, and so these women came out, and they are now organizing under Haya March, and they always announce wherever Aurat March announce, that they'll start their protest, or their kind of gathering. They'll say they'll come to the same place, and they will. There is always a threat, So I think this whole Aurat March has become like a kind of at the time of 8th March, the whole society gets kind of a divided, So there are people who wanted to maintain the gender status quo in a society, and the people who are more progressive. And increasingly, what we see, there are more younger men are also joining, Aurat March. So I think the religion has always been weaponized against women in Pakistan. And as you know, even the state has used that during Zia's time. It started with that. I mean, they used their Islamization project, started with this legislation, because against discriminatory legislation against women. So definitely, what we see, that when it comes to opposing women, I think the state and the religious fundamentalists, they just stand together, and women do not feel that they're getting any protection from the state, and they are left alone. However, one thing I'll say, that despite all that threats and attacks on women rights activists, of especially Aurat March organizers and all that, this every year, this Aurat March is being now organized in a lot more cities, So it is spreading. all over Pakistan. And I think there are more and more younger people are also joining the movement. Although I must say the Aurat March movement is very much, it's very much this event oriented at the moment. But I think slowly what we'll see now, within this, the right activists, within these movements are now making a much more stronger connection with the other progressive and other social movements. And they are also, you could see these young feminists now, sort of talking or taking leads in other progressive secularist movement as well. So I think in that way it is a very strong, powerful women collective, which is not been cowed down with these threats from the religious lobby.
Thank you very much. Sahar, there's a question by Yasmin Nouri to you. She asks, can Sahar Saba give a short insight into the psychological impact of women being restricted and almost invisible from all walks of life? Besides that, I have another question as well, which will be great if you could answer. You argued against recognizing the Taliban regime. Why? And second question, especially in Pakistan, the Pakistani media, and if you meet people, at least in urban areas, the chattering classes, middle classes, they would tell you, okay, look, there is peace in Afghanistan now. This was the same debate we had in the 1990s as well. So these three aspects, if you could answer. Finally, if possible, since the webinar is titled Axis of Hope, is there a hope?
Well, I will start with the question why Taliban should not be recognized. I think it's very obvious how, if we talk about these so-called international community who on one hand are arguing or are claiming to be democratic countries and free countries and women's rights and human rights and freedom and justice and all these good things and values, but on the other hand are trying or ready to recognize the most misogynist and most inhuman regime is the Taliban. Taliban's history has shown right from their beginning in in the 1996, what ideology they have when it comes to human rights, to women's rights, most importantly, that they don't recognize women as human being. When they have decrees like women's voice should not be heard, women should not be seen, they should be disappeared from public life. So, of course, I mean, how, besides all those other crimes, imputations and killings and arresting and using religion against freedom of expression and in every kind of crimes and atrocities that happened in the name of religion. So I think no one, I mean, how one can justify to recognize such a regime or to work with such a regime or people or group of people in Afghanistan. So that's why I think it's a right and just demand from our side, from the people of Afghanistan, not to recognize such a criminal group. And the second question which Yasmin has raised, I mean, definitely and undoubtedly there is all these atrocities and these crimes have affected Afghan people, not physically, not just restricted their rights to basic human rights, but also psychologically. It's a huge how to it's unbelievable how the Afghan people and women have been affected psychologically. That one, you don't see yourself any longer as a human being, because you are not you are not considered as one. So you don't dare to go outside. You don't have like hopes for, not just for your own self, but for your children, for your future, which are the children. You don't know. You just try to survive in the most difficult ways. And women, of course, I mean, to anyone, we have many relatives in Afghanistan, and we talk maybe not on daily basis, but quite often. And what they report and what they say, it's unbelievable. What you take from the talks with them is like the darkness, that there is emptiness in Afghanistan, and that is the most painful thing. But I would say, despite all this, that I would say there is still hope in Afghanistan after 45 of years of war, in this psychological and trauma in different ways. If the people of Afghanistan and the women were able and are able to survive, I think that is because of the hope that they have for themselves, and they have resisted. I didn't have time to talk a lot about how the Afghan women and people have resisted in different ways, and how they have tried to use any little opportunity to raise their voice and to change their life for better. So I think there is always hope, and that hope also will be more visible if we also have the solidarity movement, and together with the women in Afghanistan, to raise their voices in whatever way possible for us here outside.
Thank you very much. Lastly, there is a question which could be directed to any three of you, but I thought I will ask Frieda. The question was also posed again by Yasmin Nouri. She says, how can women in Iran and especially Pakistan support and raise awareness in regard to the gender apartheid in Afghanistan? And let me add another question that I had in my mind, Frieda, before you sum up. A question that we discuss as activists in Pakistan very often, especially when the recent movement was going on. Um, it you know after many years, Iran was sort of a discussion very much in ordinary people as well who are not active in politics. Uh, what is the social base of this regime? How come it survives a huge mass movement almost, every 10 years? Over to you.
Thank you. Great questions. I'm sorry. You wanted me to go first, right?
Yeah, you are the last panelist to speak, and then we'll have some minutes to open it for the audience as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So concerning supporting women in Afghanistan, I think the most important thing for women inside Iran to do is to combat the anti-Afghan sentiments that are very strong inside Iran, that are, of course, promoted by the government, presenting Afghan migrants um, as unwanted people who should be kicked out of Iran, even though they're doing such massive labor in the informal economy. So we have to combat the anti-Afghan sentiments inside Iran, which exist among women too. That's to me the most important thing to do, to express our solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. And and also to keep writing about the situation of women in Afghanistan. I myself, I'm in touch with women in Afghanistan, and I've done my best to write about their struggle and also get them to write in Persian, which I translate to English. So we need to do more of that, translate them into English, or luckily we have the same language, so we don't have the same problem. We can just get articles from them, and we have done that too, published articles from Afghan women in Iranian women online journals. Secondly, a question about the social base of the regime. Well, for many years, they did have a base within the working class, because they were, from the time of the revolution on, the Islamic Republic, in a way, lured part of the working class by giving them subsidies and benefits, and also by giving men, both from the working class and all classes, benefits like going back to polygamy and many of the even meager laws that had been passed under the regime of the Shah, which was of course very repressive and authoritarian, but still there were some meager reforms concerning women and the family that were achieved because of women's struggles. And so those were all taken away. So that, in a way, that was also used to lure men to say, here, if you join the Islamic Republic, we'll give you subsidies, and we'll also give you these benefits as men to promote your patriarchal rule in the family and the society. And it really did work. And they also gave assistance to women who were willing to promote the Islamic fundamentalist regime. They gave them a lot of benefits. Unlike the Taliban, who just forced the women to stay at home, they said, if you support the Islamic Republic, we'll give you money, we'll give you benefits, you can get an education, but you stay with us and promote us ideologically. And that worked too. But now, in the past 20 years especially, that has changed, because Iran's intervention in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, now Yemen, of course, and all the money that is being given to the Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in among the Palestinians, it's really backfired in a way that people are seeing how these wars and these imperialist interventions and this militarism, not to mention the nuclear program and the missile program, all the missiles they're building for Russia, which they're sending to Ukraine, to Russia to attack, to pummel the struggle for self-determination in Ukraine. People are seeing how they're affecting them and making them poor. And they don't want it. They realize there's a connection between these interventions, these nuclear programs, missile programs, and the fact that their standard of living has gone way down. And the majority of the population right now is very, very poor. So that social base has been greatly diminished. I would say that when based on the some of the studies done by the site Zamaneh, which is based in Holland, that has a lot of readers inside Iran and a lot of connections inside Iran, maybe of the general population, maybe 20% support the regime. And that's a huge, and even less, maybe 15 to 20% support the regime. However, what is helping this regime right now is the connections to Russia and China, that they get so much support from the Chinese regime, financially, military-wise, especially military-wise from Russia, financially and otherwise from China. So it's those regimes, and it's also the proxies in the region that is promoting. That is what keeping this regime alive. The militarism, the repressive system, and the fact that they get support from this, what they call the axis of resistance. And thank you for calling this meeting the Axis of Hope. Thank you, Farzana. That's a great title. So that's how they've stayed in power. They do not have a mass space. It's these regimes and these imperialist powers that are helping. Concerning the issue of solidarity with Afghan women's struggle against gender apartheid, I wanted to mention the special issue of feminist dissent on this particular topic that my sister Janet Afary edited. It was published about 2 months ago. And here is the screen if you'd like to take a look and go to that page on the internet. As you can see the table of contents, and you can also download the full issue, the digital issue. It's free of charge, and it's quite a rich issue. So I hope people take a look at it.
Thank you very much. We have 11 minutes left. I would invite friends in our audience, if they want to speak, to have an intervention, you are most welcome. But please raise your hand first and we will allow you. Well, there is a comment by Umar Hayat. He's from Pakistani controlled Jammu and Kashmir. He wants to raise voice for the to activists. I have already spoken about Asma and Arslan against this blasphemy case. Yes, definitely we do, and we have written about it in English. The article has been posted online, being shared, and I will share with the panelists and other friends that are interested here. It will also be circulated. So if there are no more people interested in speaking or asking questions, I think we can wrap this meeting up. But before we wrap this meeting, there is Thomas Rieger who wants to say something. Thomas, I think you can speak just by opening your mic.
Okay, yeah, my mic should be open right now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I send it by chat to Farzana, but because somehow I do not have access to this question and answer section. There are eminent Pakistani, what you call Muslim feminists, with some philosophical and theological, let's say, human. And I would be like Rifat Hassan or Asma Barat and so on. So I would like to ask, do they have some impact on discourse in religious circles in Pakistan? Is there something like, we know, for example, from Indonesia, something like a progressive Muslim current that brings different perspectives into the religious thinking, or are they more or less limited to a very academic audience?
You're asking me, Thomas, as for I think as for the impact of the work of Asma Barlas or Dr. Rifat Hassan, I think in our it is more, I would say mostly, like, of course, in the academia. I mean, even when we taught courses on gender and Islam, we use, their interpretation of Quran and also Islamic history, which support then the gender rights, But I think in Pakistan, of course, there are progressive Muslims, but I think the dominant discourse of Islam, which is, of course, with the state backing, like Council of Islamic Ideology, which interpret religion and the women's rights, from the religious kind of perspective, that is very, very retrogressive. That's very patriarchal, very misogynist. So I think as far as the women's movement in Pakistan is concerned, I think we all try to remain within the more kind of a secular space, because we feel that that is not our strong footage, if we go and start demanding for gender equality, from the religious perspective, then obviously I think that the dominant discourse of religion and also this authority to interpret is very much in the hands of mullahs and so-called Islamic scholars, which of course interpret then they basically propagate the sexual division of labor. Their argument is always that there is gender equality, there is no difference between men and women in terms of status, but there has to be a sexual to be enough labor. Women should be stay within the home. Their primary roles are as mothers and wives within the arena of home, and the men supposed to be the bread earner and the public space, they're supposed to be in the public space. And I think that creates a fundamental problems, that creates vulnerability when women are not economically independent. So I think as for women's movement in Pakistan is concerned, I think it's not, we still prefer to remain within the secular kind of a space, within the human rights kind of a framework, and demand for our, equal rights, within. But on the other hand, of course, I think in terms of countering, academically countering the argument, what comes from a very conservative religious, from religious scholars, these scholarship help us, the feminist Muslim feminists writing about, women's rights and all that. It helps us, that we can justify. But I don't think it has a generally kind of even in the women's movement, the Muslim feminist or Islamic feminist, I think that they have not become very popular as although there are some feminists who wanted to remain within this Islamic discourse and argue for gender equality rights within. But I think largely the majority of the women rights activists are refraining from using, kind of a religious discourse in order to promote gender equality, or gender justice in society.
Thank you, Farzana.
Thank you very much. We have 4 more minutes. If there is any other attendee who want to pose a question, is most welcome. Else we will wrap it up. And before we wrap it up, I will remind everyone that we have recorded this meeting, and I hope the panelists have no objection if we post it on YouTube as well as on Jidojahad. So we will edit it in coming days, and this will be posted online, and hope we get some more attention in the blogosphere. It seems there are no more questions. So let me thank all the panelists, all the attendees for sparing time on a weekend and joining us. Thanks a lot, and hope this meeting will also lead to some future collaboration between the 3 countries, not just the women movement, but also the progressive forces in all these 3 countries, as well as elsewhere. Some of the comrades from Europe also joined, and hope we, through these small initiatives, are able to contribute to this international movement for justice, for equality, for socialism, for democracy. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening, or a lovely start of the day in the case of Los Angeles.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.